happen with solidarity in the world? If we are saying that bringing food or making sure that all people on this planet have access to food, that is a global challenge, because actually the access to food is a global right from the World Food Summit in 1996. So there is a global responsibility here. What is the solidarity? Is there a solidarity issue related to how Europe is actually planning for its agriculture and open up for trade and making sure that we can secure food access around the world? But then, of course, we have a lot of problems related to that. But we have to look at national and regional planning in a global context also, because it has implications, not least when it comes to food and food security. The governance you can talk forever about, and there is a lot of pressure on the fact, coming from the first one not least, that we need to change governance. And this is not easy. I take an example from my own background in the United Nations systems, where there is continuous fights about governance issues. Should the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations work on environmental issues related to agriculture? Or should the United Nations Environment Programme work on agriculture issues related to environment? That's just one simple example, but this is the problems that you have at the global level with the United Nations systems. 28 UN agencies have water on their agenda. So many of these are very interconnected. And then it goes down all the way to the local level. How do we plan for our resources at the national and local level? So governance issues will be key. And we probably need to see a lot of reform there. Efficiency. We see more and more studies showing that 40% of the food is thrown away or is lost in production. What can we do there? Is the focus, and I argue, at least from FAO's perspective, that the focus was only on production. We need to increase production. They almost never talked about efficiency. They almost never talked about actually the fact that then 40% of the food is lost. Or we are translating a lot of food to feed instead, for instance. So what can we do in these areas? And then investments in innovation and research and development. And I need to look a little bit of some numbers that I think UNESCO is producing a report, and I'm just focusing on the research part here. It's quite fascinating. In 1990, North America, Europe, and Japan together stood for 95% of the global research and development budget. Okay? Public in this case. In 2007, so 70 years later, this was 76%. So there is a complete shift also when it comes to research and development. And as I said, this is an opportunity. Many new actors and new countries are coming. But we should also then realize, because I know not least at universities here in Sweden, we complain about the fact that we don't get enough money. But if you look between, in 2007, $1.15 trillion were invested in research and development in total, not in agriculture, sorry, but in total, which was a 45% increase from 2002. 45% increase. But all that increase will be, or is actually in many developing countries, and not least the fast-growing economies. But the research and development is only one aspect, and I would also still argue, having kids in school, that we still have also a fundamental problem, even at that level, when it comes to basic education, to understand the complexity of these issues and the integration. We are continuing to foster people into thinking quite sectoral and not looking at the problems in this more horizontal way. So, thank you very much. I answered absolutely no questions, as you realize. I just sort of handed over a lot of problems again. But I was trying at least to a little bit give, how, if you work from a global perspective, how you see these issues. And that, I hope, can also stimulate some discussions in the more specific research workshops. How do you actually present the research in a way which makes sense also for the global level and for these questions? So thank you.
Nice comments.
No, I didn't answer any questions. I will answer.
So, questions?
If the become very specific, I would ask you.
Heldur Pettersson from Estonia. Just you spoke about average and total numbers in world, but as we know, 75–80% of citizens of the world, they are living on the 7% of land. It's a very high level concentration, because if we take average numbers, they are okay, and there are not problems in EU countries, only issues there are. But as we know, in India, in some places, China, people are living in very concentrated way, and 100 years ago we had dry toilets and so on. Very many took soil, but now all is going with water to seas and oceans, because it's a very dangerous concentration. Not take and don't look only average numbers.
Absolutely not. What is interesting, of course, is that the most densely populated continent on planet Earth is Europe. And I mean, it was a picture showing the population density behind there. So Europe is not up here, but if you look at it on average, it's the most densely populated on the planet still. And one of the reasons, of course, we can probably cope with that is because we are not least, very active on the world market. We are making sure that we can import natural resources. And probably this is a tendency you will see in other countries also with similar challenges. Large populations, small amounts of land, you have to find the resources somewhere else. But you're absolutely right. I mean, averages are not interesting in a way. It's really to look at the specific numbers and dynamics.
Fred Stoddard, University of Helsinki. At the start and the end of your talk, you mentioned how we are privileged to work in the agricultural sciences, and I agree with you 100%. It excites me to do my work, and I think most of the people in the room would agree. But we often find when we are dealing with our national funding bodies that we are in the valley of death. One can get money to do lovely things on Arabidopsis or mouse, the model organisms. But as soon as you try to do something equally lovely on water use efficiency or perhaps nutrient recycling in cropping systems, the response comes from the reviewer of the National Academy. Look, there's no point in doing this work except on Arabidopsis or mouse. And I can tell from the sound of the room around me that that Finland is not the only country that experiences this. Now you have a global perspective, and perhaps you might have some insights for us about how global organizations or European organizations from the top, or us as scientists from the bottom, can persuade our national funding bodies to be a little more, to have a little more lateral thinking, perhaps, to look at some of the global perspectives, the complexities that you lined up through your talk.
It's a very difficult question, of course. No doubt about it. I mean, I think if you look at the global level, what is quite interesting to see in the mobilization of financial resources for issues related to this is when you have a crisis, for instance. I mean, you could see that when you had the food crisis in 2008, suddenly both the World Bank and FAO, others, World Food Program, they went out, they got pledges, billions of dollars, to food aid, basically. But I know the struggle in FAO, not least, which is a very technical organization, where they try to argue that, but we must build from below. I mean, it's about capacity, it's about planning, it's about having the right resources to avoid catastrophes, of course. I mean, to be able to cope with climate change, etc. But you're absolutely right. You you had a very similar situation, that very difficult to mobilize government resources for that core business of these more technical organizations. But suddenly when you have a crisis, you can mobilize 10, 20 billion dollars for coping with the crisis. You can mobilize the political support and so on. I would argue, and I'm sure that similar things are going on in other places, but what's actually presented here from SLU, the fact that you try to sort of cluster research areas and you rename them slightly. I mean, you make them a little bit more attractive, to be honest. I mean, you have to be more selling. I mean, it's unfortunately a bit like that. That's why you see climate change being added to almost every research program. And focusing, saying that these are the future areas of development, for instance. And I think we have to be better at selling our research that way, because those that you are quite often dealing with, they don't necessarily understand the role of your research in a global or in a larger context. But my answer is almost as fuzzy as my presentation, and so it's a highly interesting and very, very important question. How do you manage to mobilize despite all these problems? We see a decline in many research budgets, which is a shame.